Say goodbye to the cliff. My daughter-in-law didn't actually say the words, but as she leaned in to hug me, her eyes screamed them. She smelled of expensive vanilla perfume and something else. Fear. My son Jason just stood by the driveway, staring at his shoes, smiling that weak, trembling smile he'd perfected over a lifetime of disappointments. They thought their plan was airtight. They thought the tragic accident on the mountain pass would look like a mechanical failure. They forgot one thing. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer. I know how to spot a hairline fracture before the whole building comes down. And I was about to show them that when you try to demolish a load-bearing wall, you better make sure you aren't standing underneath it. If you're listening to this, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are watching from. It helps to know I'm not just talking to the ghosts in this empty house. Let me back up. It started on a Tuesday with a bottle of wine that cost too much and a lie that would cost them everything. The house was too big for one man. I had known that since the day my wife Elizabeth passed away 4 years ago, leaving a silence in the hallways that no amount of radio static could fill. It was a sprawling colonial on a 2-acre lot, a structure built with the kind of brick and quarter-sawn oak that you simply don't see anymore. I sat at the head of the dining table. My knuckles were stiff. Arthritis. It comes for us all like rust on an iron bridge. I rubbed my thumb against my palm, feeling the bone grind. Pain is just a signal. Ignore it. The doorbell rang. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when the first tremor of the coming earthquake hit. The wind was stripping the maples bare outside, slapping wet leaves against the dining room windows like desperate hands trying to get in. My son Jason and his wife Chloe came over for dinner. This was a deviation from the pattern. They usually reserved visits for Sundays, short obligatory stopovers between brunch and football. "Dad," Jason said, pouring me a glass of a heavy Cabernet. The bottle was expensive, too expensive. I watched the red liquid swirl into the crystal glass. Jason's hand shook slightly. Just a tremor, like a bridge vibrating in high wind. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine, Jason," I said, cutting into the pot roast with surgical precision. The knife scraped against the china, a harsh sound in the quiet room. "Just preparing for the trip." I was leaving Friday morning for my annual solitude at my cabin in the Upper Peninsula. It was a pilgrimage I had made for 30 years. It was a rugged drive, 4 hours of winding asphalt that eventually gave way to gravel, ending in dead zones where cell service went to die. "That's what we wanted to talk to you about," Chloe said. She didn't eat. She sat across from me, her posture rigid. Chloe was a realtor, ambitious, sharp-angled, and perpetually dissatisfied. When she walked through my front door, she didn't look at the family photos. She looked at the crown molding. She looked at the square footage. She leaned forward, placing a manicured hand on my forearm. Her skin was cool. "We're worried," she said. Her voice dropped to a whisper of curated concern. "The weather forecast is calling for rain, maybe black ice. And your SUV, it's getting up there in years. It's a 20. It has 30,000 miles on it." "I know," she said. Her eyes, usually hard and calculating, were softened by a performance of empathy. "But I borrowed it last week to pick up the staging furniture. Remember? The brakes felt spongy." I stopped chewing. "Spongy? There was a delay between the pedal and the caliper," she continued, gaining confidence, "and a rattle in the rear axle when I hit 60. A distinct metallic clunk, like a loose bolt rattling in a tin can." I frowned. I put my fork down. I am meticulous about my machines. I listened to my car the way a doctor listens to a heart. I hadn't heard a rattle. "I didn't hear anything," I said, my voice steady. "And the brakings was within spec last time I drove into town." Jason chimed in then. He wasn't looking at me. He was pushing his glazed carrots around his plate, building little orange walls and tearing them down. "Maybe your hearing isn't what it used to be, Dad," he said. "High-frequency vibration is the first thing to go. If you lose your brakes on those switchbacks, if a tie rod snaps on the pass..." He let the sentence hang. It was a gruesome image, planted with precision. He looked up then, and I saw a flash of genuine fear in his eyes. "He's terrified, but not for me." "We can't lose you two," Chloe said softly. That last sentence landed heavy, a direct invocation of Elizabeth. I looked at them. I saw a son who looked anxious, sweating in a room that wasn't hot, and a daughter-in-law who looked desperate to help. I felt a surge of guilt for my suspicion. They were family. The structural integrity of a family relies on trust. If I couldn't trust them, the roof had already caved in. I have a friend, Chloe said, her eyes locking onto mine. He runs a specialist shop downtown. Prestige Auto. Let Jason take the car in tomorrow. They'll do a full safety check. Brakes, fluids, alignment. On us. Please, Arthur, for our peace of mind? I took a sip of the wine. It tasted bitter. All right, I sighed. If it stops you from worrying, take it tomorrow. Chloe beamed. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a bright, victorious baring of teeth. Thank you, Arthur. You won't regret it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I thanked them for it. Wednesday passed in a blur of quiet routine. The house felt larger and emptier without the car in the driveway. Jason picked up the SUV at 8:00 a.m. sharp. He didn't stay for coffee. He took the keys without making eye contact, mumbling about a busy morning at the agency. I spent the day in my workshop, restoring an old Zenith radio. I soldered a loose connection. I watched the vacuum tubes glow warm and orange. Simple. Logical. If a wire connects, the signal flows. People aren't like radios. You can't see the broken connections until the smoke starts rising. Thursday evening, just as the sun was bleeding a bruised orange into the horizon, Jason returned the vehicle. It was gleaming. The black paint looked like a pool of oil. They had washed it, waxed it, and detailed the tires until the rubber shone wetly. Good as new, Jason announced, tossing me the keys. He stood in the driveway, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting toward the street as if expecting an ambush. The mechanic said the brake pads were down to the metal, he said, laughing a little too loudly. Dangerously thin. He said another 100 miles, and the rotors would have sheared. He replaced them all. Down to the metal? I asked, looking at the pristine alloy wheel. I had them checked 6 months ago at the dealership. Ceramics don't degrade that fast, Jason. Maybe you've been riding them hard on the hills, Jason shrugged. Anyway, it's done. You're safe. Call us when you get there, okay? Seriously, call us the second you arrive. I will, I said. Thanks, Jason. He hugged me. It was a quick, stiff embrace. He smelled of nervous sweat and cheap cologne, a scent that tried to mask the odor of fear. He jumped into Chloe's waiting sedan at the curb. The engine was already running, and they sped off, tires chirping against the asphalt. I stood in the driveway, holding the key fob. The air was turning cold, the temperature dropping with the sun. I walked to the driver's side. I opened the door. The smell of industrial new car scent hit me, acrid, chemical, overpowering. It smelled like a cover-up. I sat in the seat. It had been moved forward for someone with shorter legs. I adjusted it back, listening to the whir of the electric motor. I reached for my wallet, which I had been holding in my left hand along with a stack of mail. As I shifted to put the key in the ignition, my elbow bumped the center console. The leather wallet slipped from my grip. It slid down the narrow, dark gap between the seat and the console, that impossible abyss where loose change and French fries go to die. Blast, I muttered. I opened the door and climbed out. My knees popped as I knelt on the concrete driveway. The cold dampness seeped through my trousers immediately. I groaned, twisting my body to reach under the seat, my cheek pressed against the floor mat. I reached blindly into the gap. I felt the smooth leather of the wallet and grabbed it, but as I pulled my hand back, my knuckles grazed something else. It was hard, plastic, cold, and it was attached to the metal seat rail, hidden deep in the shadows where no mechanic would need to go, and no noddler would think to clean. I froze. My internal gyroscope, the one that sensed balance and orientation, tilted sharply. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom of the footwell. I lowered my head to the floor mat again, straining my neck. There, magnetized to the steel frame, was a small black box. It was about the size of a deck of cards. A tiny green light pulsed on its side, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Blink, blink, blink. A GPS tracker. The air left my lungs. The world went silent. The birds stopped singing. The distant hum of traffic vanished. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears, louder than any gale. My daughter-in-law said my car needed maintenance to keep me safe. Lies. She always smiled when she lied. They hadn't taken the car to fix the brake. They hadn't taken it to flush the fluids. They had taken it to plant a bug. Why? My mind raced, categorizing data points like I was reviewing a failed blueprint. Jason's gambling debts, I knew about them, though he thought I didn't. I'd seen the collection notices he tried to hide. Chloe's failed real estate investments. They were bleeding money. They were drowning, and I was the dam holding back the flood. If they knew where I was, if I was at the cabin, isolated, miles from help, 4 hours from the nearest police station. I reached up and pulled the device free. It says it came off with a solid clack of high-grade magnets. I held it in my hand. It was heavy, a high-end unit, cellular data, real-time tracking. I stood up, my knees screaming in protest. I looked at the house, my sanctuary, my fortress. I looked at the street where my son had just driven away. I could drive over there. I could scream. I could throw the tracker in their faces and demand the truth, but the engineer in me took over. Panic is a structural failure. Emotion is an unstable variable. Anger is a load-bearing risk that leads to collapse. I needed to reinforce my position. I needed to test the variables. If I confronted them, they would lie. It's for your safety, Dad. You're getting old. We just want to find you if you get lost. We love you. I needed to know their true intent. I needed to calculate the stress they were under, and exactly how far they were willing to go to break the beam. I needed to know the depth of the hole they were in. I walked back into the house, leaving the lights off. I went to my study and opened my old Rolodex. I found the card I was looking for. Alias Thorne, private investigator. We had worked together years ago, vetting contractors for high-rise projects. He was a cynical man who smelled of tobacco and cheap coffee, but he could find a needle in a haystack. I dialed his number. It rang 4 times.
Thorne, a gravelly voice answered. Elias, it's Arthur. Arthur, you sound like you're calling from a grave. I need a financial workup, Elias. Tonight, on my son, Jason, and his wife, Chloe. That's irregular, Arthur, and expensive. I don't care about the cost. They just planted a tracker on my car. Silence on the line. Then the sound of a lighter clicking. Give me an hour, Elias said. If you're still hooked with us, hit like before we continue. I walked into my garage, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I looked at the tracker blinking in my hand. It was broadcasting a signal right now. It was telling them I was home. It was telling them the target was stationary. I needed a ghost. I knew the logistics of this town better than the city planners. I knew the traffic flows, the choke points, and the arteries. The interstate, 2 miles east, was a major corridor for cross-border trade. Every night, hundreds of 18-wheelers thundered north, hauling steel and timber to the Canadian border. I got in my car, my now safe car, which felt like a coffin on wheels, and drove, not to Jason's house, to the petrol stop on Route 9. It was a city of neon and diesel, an island of noise in the night. I parked in the shadows of the overflow lot, far away from the overhead sodium lights. I watched. I saw a massive Kenworth T680, a beast of chrome and steel, its engine idling with a deep, rhythmic thrum that shook the pavement. The driver, a burly man in a flannel jacket, was doing his walk-around inspection, thumping tires with a mallet. The plates on the trailer read Manitoba. Perfect. A long-haul vector. I waited until the driver went inside to grab a coffee and a sandwich. I pulled my hood up. I walked casually past the truck, my heart hammering against its ribs like a trapped bird. I pretended to tie my shoe, near the rear bumper of the trailer, crouching in the grease and grime. I reached up and slapped the magnetic tracker onto the inside of the ZLD bar. It held fast. Have a nice trip, I whispered into the exhaust-filled air. I taped a $20 bill and my business card to it. On the card I wrote, "If found, please call. Reward." I walked back to my car, my hands trembling, not from age, but from adrenaline. I drove away. I didn't go home. If the tracker was moving north and I was sitting in my living room with the lights on, the deception would fail if they drove by to check. The alibi had to be perfect. I drove to the house of my neighbor Frank. Frank was a snowbird, currently sipping margaritas in Sarasota for the winter. I had a key to water his plants and check his furnace. I pulled my SUV into his garage,
killing the lights immediately, and lowered the door. Then I walked through the backyard hedge, moving through the darkness like a thief in my own life. I entered my house through the cellar door, the hinges groaning softly. I didn't turn on a single light. I went to my study on the second floor. I sat in the high-backed leather chair where I had designed bridges and skyscrapers. I turned on my security monitor system, a bank of 4 screens glowing with a pale blue light. My phone buzzed. It was Elias. "I found it, Arthur," Elias said. "It's ugly. Tell me. Chloe is being sued. 2 commercial properties she bought. They're empty. She leveraged everything. She owes the bank $3 million. And Jason is worse." "How bad?" "Gambling," Elias said. "He's into a loan shark named Sam, the shark Valenti, for 200 grand. The payment is due Monday. If he doesn't pay, Valenti breaks his legs," I finished. "Or worse," Elias said. "They're desperate, Arthur. They need a payout. Fast." I hung up. My will. They were the sole beneficiaries of my life insurance, double indemnity for accidental death. They weren't just tracking me. They were hunting me. I needed to secure the perimeter. I called Sarah Jenkins. She was the branch manager at my bank. We had been friends for 40 years. "Sarah," I said, "it's Arthur. I need you to flag my accounts." "Arthur?" She sounded worried. "I was going to call you tomorrow. We received a transfer request today. For the deed to your house. It was flagged as power of attorney pending." "I didn't send a request, Sarah." "I know," she whispered. "The signature, it looked traced. I put a hold on it." "Keep holding it," I said. "And Sarah, if anyone asks, tell them the transfer is processing." "Arthur, what is going on?" "I'm finding the cracks, Sarah. Just trust me." They had already sold the house. I wasn't even dead yet. Friday morning, the day I was supposed to leave, the house was cold. I hadn't turned up the heat, afraid the furnace venting would signal presence. I sat wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the tracking app on my tablet. I had guessed Jason's password on the second try. It was his wedding anniversary, none 42s in or 118, a date that marked the beginning of his end. The dot on the screen was moving. The semi-truck was doing 70 miles an hour, crossing into Wisconsin, a relentless pixel heading for the edge of the map. To Jason and Chloe, it looked like I was on my way. They were watching a ghost. At 9:00 a.m., my phone rang. The screen lit up with Chloe's name. I stared at it. The vibration buzzed against the mahogany desk. I let it ring twice, composing myself, finding the frequency of a man on the road. I cleared my throat. I answered. "Hello?" I made my voice sound slightly distant, distracted, projecting over the imaginary hum of tires. "Arthur, good morning." Her voice was chirpy, brittle as spun sugar. "Are you on the road?" "Yes," I lied. "Just hit the open highway. Traffic is light. Making good time." "Oh, wonderful. Remember, the signal gets bad up north, past the bridge. Don't worry if we can't reach you. Just keep driving. Don't stop unless you have to." "I will. The car feels good. Smooth. That makes me so happy to hear." "Drive safe, Arthur." Click. She wasn't calling to say goodbye. She was calling to confirm the target was in motion. She wanted to ensure I was the one moving the dot. The day dragged on, in agonizing slow motion. I felt like an intruder in my own history. I watched the dust motes dance in the shafts of light slicing through the blinds. I thought about Jason. I remembered teaching him to fish on the pier, his small hands struggling with the reel. I remembered the day he graduated, the pride that had swelled in my chest. How did we get here? Was it greed? Was it desperation? Or was it something colder, a structural flaw in his character I had failed to reinforce? By 4:00 p.m., the tracker showed the truck crossing the international bridge into Canada. This was the tipping point, the stress test. If they were truly worried about my safety, seeing their father cross an international border when he was supposed to be in a cabin in Michigan would trigger a panic. They would call the police. They would call me to ask why I was going to Canada. I waited. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating. My phone remained silent. 5:00 p.m. The sun began to set, casting long skeletal shadows across the room. 6:00 p.m. Nothing. That silence cut deeper than any word. They didn't know where I was. They didn't care about the destination. They just cared that I was gone. At 7:30 p.m., the motion sensor on my driveway alert chimed softly in the steady. Bing bong. I looked at the monitor. A white van pulled into my driveway. It wasn't Jason's luxury sedan. It was a rental, anonymous and nondescript. Jason and Chloe got out. They were dressed in dark clothes, like caricatures of burglars. Chloe was carrying a heavy canvas tote bag. Jason was holding a toolbox. His posture slumped. They walked to the front door. They didn't ring the bell. They didn't knock. Jason pulled out a key, the emergency spare I had given him years ago just in case. They let themselves in. I was upstairs now, watching from the landing. Hidden in the gloom of the hallway, I held my breath. The front door opened and closed. "Hurry, Chloe." Her voice echoed in the foyer, sharp and dangerous. "He's near Thunder Bay by now. The signal is steady. He won't be back for days." "I feel sick," Jason muttered. "This is wrong, Chloe, walking into his house like this. Do you want to lose our house, Jason? Do you want those men to come back and break your legs? We need the deeds. We need the bonds. We need the jewelry. Get the safe open. You know the combination." I can't remember if it's right, left, right, or... "Focus," she snapped. They walked toward the study. They were robbing me, my own son, my own flesh and blood. I gripped the oak banister until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to go down there. I wanted to turn on the lights and scream at them. I wanted to ask how much I was worth. But something stopped me. A structural anomaly, an engineer's intuition. If they just wanted to rob me, why the elaborate maintenance? Why the tracker? They had a key. They knew my schedule. They could have robbed me any time I went to the grocery store or the barber. They needed me far away. They needed an alibi. They needed time. I stayed hidden. I watched on the monitor as they looted my safe. They took the bearer bonds I had saved for 30 years. They took Elizabeth's diamond necklace, the one I gave her on our 25th anniversary. They left 20 minutes later. I didn't stop them. I let them go because as I watched the taillights of the van fade into the night, I realized the robbery wasn't the end of the story. The robbery was just the funding. The main event was still to come. Saturday morning, I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the empty wall safe. The door hung open like a wound. I had called the police an hour ago. They were on their way to take a report. I had told them the simplified version. I came home early from my trip, sensing something was wrong, and found the house tossed. Then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Area code 204, Manitoba. My heart stopped. This was the call, the variable I hadn't calculated. I answered, my hand shaking. "Hello? Is this Arthur?" A deep, rough voice, crackling with static. "Yes. This is Big Mike. I drive a rig for North Star Logistics. I found a little black box on my truck this morning while I was doing my pre-trip in Winnipeg. It had your business card taped to the back." "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's mine. I'm sorry for the trouble." "No trouble, brother," the trucker said, chuckling. "We had a good laugh about it in the yard. Spying on a cheating wife or something." "Something like that? Well, listen. I'm a mechanic, too. I was poking around where you stuck that thing, and I found something else." My blood ran cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Something else?" "Yeah. There was another box. Older, but it was wired. Wired in." I paused. The silence stretched. "Wait, you found a second device on your truck?" No, the trucker corrected. I found a device stuck to your tracker. It looks like the magnet on your tracker picked it up when you pulled it off whatever it was on before, or maybe you stuck them both on together." I don't understand." "Okay, listen," the trucker said, his voice dropping the humor. "I pulled your tracker on, but hanging from the magnet was this little square unit with a solenoid plunger. It had a torn wire hanging off it like it had been ripped out of a housing." I closed my eyes. The schematic formed in my mind. The dark space under the seat. The metallic clunk Chloe had lied about. "The brake repair. It wasn't on your truck," I whispered. "It was on my car." "What?" "The magnet," I said. "When I pulled the tracker off my car, the magnets were strong. If there was another device sitting right next to it, A second device, sharing the mount. If you pulled one blindly, you might have grabbed both, the trucker surmised. Look, man, this thing I found, it's a remote-actuated solenoid valve. It's a receiver. What does it do? I asked, though I already knew. It opens a valve when it gets a signal. If this was plumbed into a hydraulic line, say a brake line, the fluid would dump, I said. Instantly, the trucker confirmed. Total loss of hydraulic pressure. Pedal goes to the floor. No resistance. No brakes. I dropped the phone onto the table. It clattered loudly. The robbery was the motive. The tracker was the scope. But the maintenance, the brake job, they hadn't just replaced the pads. They had installed a kill switch. They were going to wait until I was on the mountain pass, on those winding roads with the 1,000-foot drop. They were going to watch the dot on the screen. And when I hit the steepest, most dangerous curve, the one with the blind corner, click, Chloe'd press a button on a key fob. Or maybe Jason would do it. They weren't just thieves. They were murderers. My son, the boy I held when he had a fever, the man I put through college, was going to kill me. He wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was engineering my collapse. The police arrived 10 minutes later. 2 cruisers, lights flashing silently in the morning mist. I didn't report a robbery. I met them on the porch, holding a folder of evidence I had compiled during the long, dark night. Detective Miller, Frank's nephew, was the first out of the car. He was young, sharp, a good kid. Mr. Arthur, we got the call about the break-in. It's not just a break-in, Miller, I said. It's an attempted homicide. I gave them the tracker data. I gave them Big Mike's number in Manitoba. I gave them the video footage of Jason and Chloe raiding the safe. I gave them the receipt from the auto shop that I found in the glove box, a shop that didn't exist, signed by a mechanic named Friend. They have the remote, I told Miller. Find the remote, and you find the gun. They picked them up an hour later. They were at a diner, celebrating with pancakes, thinking I was dead in a ditch somewhere in the Upper Peninsula. I rode in the back of the cruiser to the scene. I needed to see it. I needed to witness the final collapse. We walked into the diner. Chloe was laughing. Jason was smiling, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. Then they saw me. Jason's face went the color of ash. He dropped his fork. It clattered against the plate, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. Dad, he whispered. Chloe froze. Her eyes darted from me to the police officers. No, she stammered. The signal. The signal is in Canada, I said, my voice cold and hard. I'm right here. Detective Miller searched Jason. In his pocket, they found a small gray remote. Single button. Is this it? Miller asked me.
That's it, I said. Jason began to weep. He reached out for me as they cuffed him. Dad, please. She made me do it. We were drowning. I looked at him. My legs shook, but I didn't stop. Not this time. You didn't just break the law, Jason, I said softly. You broke the foundation.
I turned away. I didn't go to the station to identify them. I couldn't bear to look at the ruins anymore. Instead, I sat on my porch as the afternoon sun began to fade. I watched the leaves fall from the old oak tree in the front yard. They fell silently, dying as they hit the ground. I thought about the structure of a family. We build it on love, on trust, on shared history. We reinforce it with memories and loyalty. We think it's made of stone and steel. We think it can withstand any storm, any load. But sometimes the rot starts from the inside. It starts in the dark places where you don't look. And by the time you see the cracks on the surface, the load-bearing beams have already turned to powder. The house was quiet. The silence was absolute now. I was safe. I was alive. I was competent. I had calculated the loads and reinforced the structure. I had survived the earthquake. But as I looked at the empty driveway, gazing at the spot where my son had waved goodbye to me for the last time, I realized the terrible truth of survival. The building was still standing, but it was condemned, and I was the only thing left alive in the ruins. Thanks for walking this journey with us all the way. With Arthur and Jason in mind, was this ending how it should have happened, or something else? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. The next story might just be about you.